Hey, everybody, and welcome back. Feeling like life's a bit of a mess lately.
Relatable.
We thought so. And it seems like a lot of people are turning to, well, Dr. Jordan Peterson
hmm
for some wisdom on navigating, all the chaos.
Yeah, he's definitely struck a nerve.
So today we're taking a deep dive into his 12 rules for life, trying to pull out some of the core ideas, see if we can actually use any of this stuff in our own lives.
Right. And I think that's a key part of his appeal. You said it, use this stuff. He's giving you stuff to actually do.
Exactly. So we've got excerpts from 12 Rules itself, and we'll be connecting those back to his bigger work, Maps of Meaning. Have you got a chance to dive into that one?
Oh, yeah. Maps of Meaning is dense, but it's like the foundational text for a lot of the ideas he explores in 12 Rules, really gets into the nitty-gritty of, mythology and the human search for meaning.
Okay, so for our listeners who are maybe just dipping their toes into Peterson's work, can you give us a little background on the guy?
Sure. So Peterson's a clinical psychologist, right? Professor at the University of Toronto. But he kind of blew up online a few years ago.
Yeah, with those lectures on YouTube.
Exactly. And then, bam, 12 Rules became this international bestseller. But the thing about Peterson is he's not afraid of controversy. He tackles some really complex, even controversial topics.
He doesn't shy away from, like, the big questions, does he? Meaning of life, good versus evil, all that stuff.
Yeah. No, he's all about confronting those things head on. He thinks those big questions are actually essential to how we live our lives, whether we admit it or not.
So how would you describe his style to someone who's never actually heard him speak?
I mean, he's super articulate, really intellectual, but he's also, like, engaging. He's a storyteller.
That's true. You get sucked into these narratives.
Totally. He'll be talking about, like, lobster neurochemistry 1 minute, and then he's quoting Dostoevsky the next.
Okay, see, that's classic Peterson right there. Lobsters and Dostoevsky.
And somehow he makes it work. It all ties back to this central theme of, order and chaos.
And personal responsibility, right?
Yeah.
That's a big one for him.
Huge. He's all about individuals taking responsibility for their own lives, their choices, their actions, even their thoughts.
Yeah, he doesn't let you off the hook with that one. He's like, no, your thoughts matter too.
Right. And that's where some people kind of, get tripped up on him. They think he's letting larger systemic issues off the hook. But I don't think that's what he's saying at all.
No, he's definitely not saying that. It's more like he's saying, look, you can't control everything, but you can control yourself.
Exactly. You can't just sit around waiting for the world to be perfect or fair or whatever. You have to start with yourself. Set your own house in order, as he puts it.
Right. It's about that internal work, right? And that's where 12 Rules comes in. He's offering this framework, these principles for, like, living a more meaningful life.
And it's interesting because he grounds these principles in all sorts of different sources. He draws on, psychology, obviously, but also philosophy, mythology, even biology, like that whole thing with the lobsters.
Speaking of lobsters, I think it's time we address the lobster in the room.
Yeah, the lobster's a good place to start because it illustrates so much of his thinking. Like, on the surface, it seems kind of random. Lobsters. What do lobsters have to do with anything? But it's actually this brilliant metaphor for the dominance hierarchy.
Okay, so break it down for us. Dominance hierarchy, lobsters. How's it all connect?
So Peterson talks about how lobsters, like a lot of other creatures, have this built-in hierarchy. There's a pecking order. And the way it plays out is partly determined by, like, brain chemistry, serotonin levels, things like that.
So he's talking about the actual, like, biological underpinnings of social behavior.
Exactly. And what he finds so fascinating is that, like, when a lobster loses a fight, right, its brain chemistry actually changes. It produces less serotonin, which is linked to confidence and dominance. Makes it less likely to challenge authority again.
Oh, wow. So, like, literally hardwired to be more submissive after a loss.
Yeah, kind of crazy, right? And of course, humans are way more complex than lobsters, but Peterson argues that we're not immune to these biological influences. We have dominance hierarchies too.
Like, in every aspect of our lives,
Oh.
right? Work, relationships, even just, like, social situations.
Exactly. And so he's not saying that this is, like, a good thing or a bad thing necessarily. He's just saying this is how it is. We have these biological drives, these instincts that influence our behavior.
So understanding those instincts can help us navigate those hierarchies more effectively.
That's the idea. It's about self-awareness. If you understand how these things work, you can make more conscious choices about how you want to engage.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not just about lobsters. It's about understanding these deeper patterns of behavior that we share with them, these echoes of our evolutionary past that continue to shape our present.
Precisely. And what's so compelling about Peterson is that he doesn't shy away from the darker aspects of this dance between order and chaos. He doesn't pretend that life is all rainbows and butterflies. He acknowledges the reality of suffering, the inevitability of setbacks and challenges, and argues that it's through confronting these difficulties, not avoiding them, that we find true meaning and purpose.
It's like his quote, "The purpose of life is finding the largest burden that you can bear and bearing it." He's saying it's when we're tested, pushed to our limits, that we discover what we're capable of.
Exactly. He's advocating for a life of meaning and a responsibility, not one of comfort and complacency. True fulfillment comes from embracing challenges, from engaging in the struggle.
Which is a great segue into his idea of nested hierarchies. Elements within a system change at different rates, which creates a kind of dynamic stability.
Yes, it's like he uses the example of a forest. Leaves change faster than trees. Trees change faster than the forest itself. It's about recognizing that change is constant, but it's not uniform.
So how does this apply to us?
Well, think about it. We live within these nested hierarchies every single day. Our families, our communities, workplaces, our country, even the whole global community.
Yeah.
Each level with its own pace, its own rules, its own expectations.
And understanding those dynamics, how those systems interact, that's crucial for navigating the complexities of modern life.
Absolutely. We can't expect everything to change at the same speed or in the same direction. It's about recognizing those different levels of influence and then finding our place within that system.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about understanding the nuances of those systems, not just getting swept up in one level without seeing the bigger picture.
Exactly. And that's where personal responsibility comes in again. We can't control everything that happens to us, but we can control how we respond. We can choose to be more aware of these nested hierarchies, understand the forces at play, and act in a way that aligns with our values and goals.
So it's about finding that balance between understanding the constraints of those systems, but also recognizing our own agency within them.
Precisely. It's that tension between those two things that I think makes Peterson's work so compelling. He's not offering easy answers, but he is offering a way to make sense of a world that can often feel chaotic and overwhelming.
It's about finding that order within the chaos, right?
Exactly. And it all starts with the individual. He might talk about lobsters and forests, but ultimately, Peterson's work is deeply humanist. He believes in the power of the individual to create meaning and to make the world a better place. And for Peterson, that individual journey, it often starts with confronting those things we'd rather avoid.
The proverbial elephant in the room.
Yeah, or maybe more like the dragon in the cave, right? He uses that metaphor a lot.
It's more evocative, that's for sure.
It is. And it gets at this idea that we all have those fears, those anxieties, those things we're trying to outrun.
But you can't outrun a dragon forever.
Exactly. Eventually it catches up to you. Or, as Peterson would say, it manifests in those negative feedback loops.
Right, like those cycles of stress, addiction, procrastination, all that fun stuff.
And he argues that those negative patterns, they often stem from avoiding something difficult. A difficult emotion, a challenging conversation, a task we're dreading.
It's like we build these walls to protect ourselves from discomfort, but we end up trapping ourselves inside.
Precisely. And so the way out, he suggests, is not to seek more comfort, but to lean into the discomfort, to confront those fears and anxieties head on.
Which, let's be honest, is way easier said than done.
Oh, absolutely. Our natural instinct is to avoid pain, to seek pleasure. But Peterson's arguing that real growth, real transformation, it happens outside of our comfort zones.
So how do we actually do that? How do we break free from those negative loops and start making more courageous choices?
Well, he offers some very practical advice. Like, he talks about the importance of setting small, achievable goals.
Instead of trying to climb Mount Everest on day one.
Right. Break down those overwhelming tasks into manageable steps. Give yourself those small wins. Build momentum.
It's about those incremental changes, right? Those little victories that add up over time.
Exactly. And be patient with yourself. Change takes time and effort. And this is where that personal responsibility piece comes in again. Because it's tempting to blame our circumstances, our upbringing, whatever, but Peterson's saying, look, you're in the driver's seat now.
Own it.
Yes. Take responsibility for your choices, your actions, your life.
To set your own house in order.
There you go. He's not peddling some quick fix self-help scheme. He's talking about a fundamental shift in perspective, a commitment to personal growth that requires ongoing effort.
And a lot of honesty, right? Which brings us to his whole thing about truth-telling.
Absolutely. He sees truth-telling as foundational to this process of self-improvement. He argues that when we lie, even those little white lies, we erode our own integrity. We create this disconnect between our inner and outer worlds.
Bro, it's like, oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive.
Exactly. And it's not just about being honest with others, it's about being honest with ourselves. Facing those uncomfortable truths that we often try to bury.
Because those buried truths, they tend to, fester.
They do. And he argues that it's in those shadows, those unexamined corners of our psyche, that those negative feedback loops often take root. So how do we shine a light into those shadows? How do we start confronting those uncomfortable truths? Besides just, admitting we like pineapple on pizza.
Well, he's got some suggestions there, too. One is journaling. The simple act of writing down your thoughts and feelings without judgment, getting it all out on paper.
Almost like you're talking to yourself on paper.
Exactly. It can be very therapeutic.
Yeah.
He also talks about therapy, finding a therapist or a counselor you trust, someone who can hold that space for you while you work through those difficult emotions.
Someone to be a guide on the side, not a sage on the stage.
Right. It's not about seeking validation or easy answers. It's about engaging in that process of self-discovery. Peeling back the layers, getting to know yourself more fully.
Warts and all.
Exactly. And that's where his whole concept of archetypes comes in. Right, because he talks a lot about archetypes, especially from mythology and religion. And I know that can be a little, off-putting for some people. They might be thinking, what does this have to do with my life?
I get that, but I think it's important to remember that he's not advocating for a literal interpretation of these stories. He's using them more as metaphors.
To illustrate those universal patterns of human experience. The struggles, the triumphs, all that.
Exactly. Like, take the hero's journey. That's a classic archetype that pops up everywhere, from ancient myths to, like you said, superhero movies.
Which, let's be honest, are basically our modern-day myths.
Totally. And Peterson would say that we can learn a lot about ourselves by understanding those archetypes, by seeing how they play out in our own lives and the stories we tell ourselves.
It's like those archetypes. They provide this framework for making sense of the world, for understanding our place in it.
Precisely. And he connects this back to his idea of order and chaos. He argues that these archetypes, these recurring patterns of behavior, they're how we as humans have traditionally imposed order on a chaotic world.
We're drawn to those narratives, those patterns, because they give us a sense of, meaning.
Right. We crave those narratives. And Peterson believes that those stories, those maps, they're still relevant today. They can still provide us with guidance, even in our increasingly secular world.
So it's not about rejecting those traditional stories. It's about finding new ways to understand them, to connect them to our own experiences.
And I think that's a really important point, because it's easy to dismiss these ancient myths and stories as irrelevant, but they endure for a reason.
They speak to something universal, something about the human condition that transcends time and culture.
Exactly. And Peterson's inviting us to tap into that wisdom, that collective human experience, and to use it to navigate our own lives. It's powerful stuff, and it makes you think about, well, what stories am I telling myself? And are they helping or hurting?
Right. Are they empowering me or holding me back? Because we all have those narratives, those internal monologues running through our heads.
All the time. And often we're not even aware of how much those narratives are shaping our perceptions, our choices, even our relationships.
So how do we become more aware of those stories? And more importantly, how do we start rewriting the ones that aren't serving us?
Well, Peterson would say it starts with taking responsibility. That word again. Right. But it's not about blaming ourselves for everything. It's about recognizing that we have the power to choose a different story.
We're not just passive characters in our own lives.
Exactly. We have agency. We can choose to challenge those negative thoughts, those limiting beliefs, and start creating a new narrative. One that's more aligned with our values, our aspirations, our potential.
It's about stepping into that author role, right? Taking control of the pen and deciding how the story unfolds.
I like that. It's about becoming the hero of your own journey. And that journey, for Peterson, is not just about personal fulfillment. It's about contributing to something larger than ourselves.
Right. He's very big on that. Finding meaning and purpose through service to others, through making a positive impact on the world.
Exactly. And that doesn't you have to go out and save the world in some grand way. It can be something small. Volunteering in your community, being a good friend, a good parent, a good neighbor.
It's about those everyday acts of kindness, of courage, of integrity. It's about showing up for yourself and for others in a way that feels meaningful.
And that's where those 12 rules, those guidelines, they come back into play. They're like tools for navigating those everyday challenges, those moments when it's tempting to take the easy way out, to give in to cynicism or despair.
He's reminding us to take the high road, to choose the path of growth and responsibility, even when it's hard.
And to remember that, we're all in this together. Life is messy. It's full of challenges, setbacks, disappointments,
Uh,
but it's also full of beauty, wonder, and the potential for incredible growth and transformation.
And ultimately, Peterson's message is one of hope. He believes in the human capacity for good, for resilience, for creating a better future. And that's something I think we can all get behind.
Absolutely. He's challenging us to step up, to become the best versions of ourselves, and to create a world that reflects those better angels of our nature.
And on that note, I want to thank you all for joining us for this deep dive into the world of Jordan Peterson. He's a complex figure, that's for sure. But I think we can all agree that his work sparked some important conversations.
Absolutely. Conversations about meaning, about responsibility, about the human condition, and those are conversations worth having.
They are. So keep those conversations going. Talk to your friends, your family, your colleagues. Share what resonated with you, what challenged you, what made you think differently. And most importantly, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep striving to create a life that is both meaningful and fulfilling. Until next time.